Welcome to At Your Library. I am Clayton Cheever, Assistant Director at the Thomas Crane Public Library. Please join me for a look at some of the free events our library is offering this August. I hope you're doing well, or at least as well as possible during this extended coronavirus pandemic. We're still working hard to inspire curiosity, spark imagination, foster community, and connect people to the online world. This month, we're rolling out some new services that I think are going to be quite popular. Starting Monday, August 3rd, you can request and pick up printouts at our main library at 40 Washington Street here in Quincy Center. You can make one request per week by emailing us at quprint@ocln.org and attaching your documents. Give us links to web pages or simply describe the information you need printed. We need you to also tell us your last name so we can associate it with your papers for easy pickup. After you've made your request, please wait for an email letting you know the printout is ready. At this time, we're not able to provide same-day pickup, but most printouts will be ready the next business day. No appointments needed or required for pickup once you've received notice that they're ready for you. Just come to our Washington Street entrance from Monday to Thursday from 10 in the morning until 8 at night, and on Fridays and Saturdays between 10 and 4. There's no charge for this service for up to 20 pages per person. Just don't forget to wear a face covering and practice safe distancing at pickup. Stay tuned for another big service rollout this month. We are going to be offering in-person access to technology services, which includes public computer sessions and print, copy, scan, and fax service. These services will be available by appointment only here at the main library. Please watch for an announcement with all the details that we'll be putting on our website. You can like us also on Facebook and Instagram and follow us on Twitter, where we will also be unveiling our plans. Have you always wanted to learn Cantonese or Mandarin? Perhaps you'd like to brush up on your high school era Spanish or practice English for your citizenship test. You can do all of this and more with our latest learning platform, Transparent Language Online. Transparent has over 100 languages to explore, and there's not even a library card required. Just go to our adult education page, which I'm showing right here. And you can scroll down on the adult education page. You can see it's just thomascraneLibrary.org/events/adult-ed. Scroll down until you see the Transparent Language Online banner. There's a little video here that has a whole tutorial on how to use it. A little more information here, or you can click right here for the online language tool, Transparent Language. Transparent Language has over 100 languages to explore. There's no library required, like I've said. All you need to do is click through to get a Transparent account. When you do, you can see I already have one, but when you're going in new, you just click sign up and fill in the forms. It's really simple. Go down here, you'll need to choose a password. You can say whether or not you want to get updates. You do have to agree to the terms of use and the privacy policy. You go ahead and create an account. It's quite simple. If you go through and you've started filling out these forms and you realize you already have an account, you can just click that right there at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and go back so that you can remember what the adult education page looks like, and maybe you'll be interested in one of the other education pieces that we have on here. Transparent Language also has a special language learning program for children ages 6+ that's called Kids Speak. We also have an app for both iPhones and Androids that's part of this new package, so you can take your learning on the go. So I hope you enjoy Transparent Language. Okay, get ready. I'm going to give you a new phone number so you can use to text our librarians to easily get your questions answered. Now it's easy to talk to librarians without a browser or a computer, and without even having to make an actual phone call. We'll respond to your texts and calls and live chats during our help desk hours, which are from 10 in the morning until 7 at night, Mondays through Thursdays, from 10 to 4 on Fridays, and from 10 to 1 in the afternoon on Saturdays. To reach us outside of help desk hours, just send an email to QUREF, that's QUREF, @ocln.org, or fill out an online form at thomascranelibrary.org/got-questions. Okay, that should give you enough time to get ready to capture our new texting number. Here it is, 857-577-8275. Again, that's 857-577-8275. These sure are different and challenging times we're living through, aren't they? In addition to finding new ways to provide services to you, we're also helping document our collective experiences of this pandemic. Together with the City of Quincy, Quincy 400, and Quincy Access Television, we're collaborating to collect moments in time from our neighbors and archive photos, videos, journal entries, art, music, and audio messages in the Quincy COVID Memories Project. There's no limit to the number of submissions you can make to this project, so please keep sharing. To learn more about this project, read our blog post about preserving Quincy COVID memories. Browse submissions and submit your own on our website, https://quincyculturalmemory.com, and you can watch this video.
The year 2020 will certainly be a memorable one, for better or worse. While it seems the COVID-19 pandemic has brought the world to a standstill, life does go on. Whether you're working from home, trying to buy groceries, or keeping the kids entertained, life in Quincy continues, just in a different fashion. As life continues, it needs to be documented. In order to document and preserve life during the pandemic, the City of Quincy, the Thomas Crane Public Library, Quincy 400, and Quincy Access Television have partnered to form Quincy COVID Memories, a project to gather, document, and share stories and experiences of people living everyday life during the pandemic. We're asking you to share stories, photos, videos, and more that best represent your experiences during this unprecedented time. Your submission can be simple, but say a lot. Like this photo of a husband, a frontline worker, leaving for work at 5:30 a.m. Asked if he might step back during the time, he rejected the idea and said, "Someone's got to do it." Or this photo of a family out for a walk, just with added protection of face masks. Or this video of a family celebrating the 89th birthday of a loved one. These submissions tell the story of life during the pandemic. Help add to the story with your daily life. Visit www.quincyculturalmemory.com to submit your story today.
We have some great programs scheduled this month. Sean Murphy is returning with another fabulous celebration of Ireland on Monday evening, August 3rd at 7. The people of Ireland have survived many hardships over the centuries. Through the culture they've developed, there are many lessons that can help us find our way through these current challenging times. Join us and you'll enjoy a mixture of Irish history, music, dance, ancient art, and comedy, all blended into a show about Ireland through the ages. This program is sponsored by the Friends of the Thomas Crane Library. I'm joined today by Sean Murphy. Sean, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure to work again with you. We've had a couple of great programs already in these really unsettling times, and I'm really excited to be working together again. Tell me about it. You know, you were inspired, I think, to put our second program that we're going to celebrate this summer together because of that survival instinct and the beauty of how Ireland and its people have survived.
Yeah, and it also goes, Irish people are known as hospitable and friendly, and a lot of people take that, for granted. But the reality is that it's rooted, in our history. The old laws and customs in ancient Ireland, hospitality was one of the key features of that, and it was structured. And even down to the basic level, everybody had to be prepared to take what was called a stranger, into the house. You got a knock on the door, you had to take them in, feed them, look after them, have them entertained. And that was, promoting the best, of Ireland. So the hospitality was a central feature, and there were laws which governed it. So the fact that Irish people continue that is connected to that distant past. Unfortunately, during the famine, that got broken for the first time, because during the famine time, when people were dying and diseased, they had to turn people away. And also, what people used to do was, to indicate that you shouldn't come near them, they had to put, there was a certain type of bush that they had to put, or some indication outside of the house, please don't come here. But the tradition of that hospitality began to be broken at that stage. But still, Irish people dance and sing everywhere. So I put this together, and it's a combination of history. So I'm trying to connect all of that to try to explain why people are what they are. I also want to show the art that people produced, particularly during the Bronze Age, the Bronze Age started in Ireland about 2500 BC, 4,500 years ago. And you can see, that the artwork there is as good as the artwork that anybody could do today. It's brilliant. We also think there are some people who argue that King Solomon's gold came from Ireland because there was so much gold, in Ireland at this time. And it's also possible that the Irish were involved. About 1200 BC, there were mines on the east coast here, copper mines that essentially were emptied by people from Europe. We think that maybe some of those may have originated from Ireland, or Ireland was a staging post, in that. So there's some amazing history there. But I'm going to give you some examples, particularly what kids are doing today. Their dancing is just wonderful, and there's a whole new focus in terms of dancing, and they're creative. I'll be showing you how they use their dance to show off the countryside and the area. So, for instance, you have kids dancing on mountaintops, so that you can see the beautiful scenery, and also on the beaches. There's have a little bit of comedy. The problem with comedy is that it's so hard to get a family comedian, and it's very hard to get any more than about 10 seconds of a comedian without something being said that's offensive. But I have Brendan Grace, who died last year, and he's the kind of the main family comedian. So I've got some of his work. So I've got the art, the songs, the music, the history to kind of tie it all together. And
you're going to be sharing a lot of, I assume, a lot of video with this, in addition to stills of some of the ancient art.
That's right.
So people can expect a very, it'll be a very multimedia presentation.
That's right. There won't be that much of me talking. There'll be plenty of embedded video. I'll also then, when I'm there, be letting you know about my ongoing courses. I teach a course of general history that starts at the very beginning in terms of Ireland, which is 1.7 billion years ago, and I bring that right up to the present day. I also do a history of each county of Ireland, and then I'm working on some new material now as well. One of the ones I'd like to do in the next year or two is the history of the Irish and American.
Well, I'm sure that would be a fascinating program that I would certainly love to learn more about. So, Sean, I am so grateful. You have such a great wealth of knowledge about Ireland and the Irish diaspora, really, because it's a lot more than just the Emerald Isle. The people of Ireland have gone on to influence culture on a global scale, and to inspire us, all of us, with wherever we all come from. We can all learn something from this history of a really amazing place. So I appreciate you sharing your passion and your knowledge with us.
Sure.
I really look forward to these programs and to more in the future. Thank you so much.
Because one of the things that, would be very, very paralleled with here is the history of the native peoples of this country. Because obviously the European history in this country is only hundreds of years old. Whereas, if we're talking about 5 to 10,000 years, it's really the native peoples of this country that would share some and would understand, some of the old and ancient history of Ireland more than Europeans.
That makes total sense. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I am looking forward to doing it.
Great. I am as well. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I look forward to seeing you there.
Okay. See you soon.
Great.
Every Tuesday and Thursday, you can join us on Twitter from noon to 1 for personalized reading recommendations. Every Tuesday, we focus on a different genre so you can branch out, or not. So far, we've looked at too good to be true nonfiction, sports books, mysteries, outdoor books, and more. To participate, be sure to add hashtag TCPL Book Chat to your tweets. We join with other librarians every Thursday for hashtag Ask a Librarian Hour. It's pretty simple. We get together and collectively answer questions and offer recommendations to tweets that use the hashtag Ask a Librarian. On Tuesday, August 4th, we have the fourth and final in a series of conversations with former Quincy College professor and 45-year Hausneck resident Ron Goodman, all about taking great photographs with your phone. This last class will focus on sharing and archiving your photos, and we'll also be looking at some photos that participants in previous sessions have shared. You can go back and watch the past 3 classes on YouTube. And if you watch last week's class, at the end, you'll hear Ron speak a bit about the photo project and how you can share. You can also drop me a line. Just send me an email at ccheever@ocln.org if you have any questions. This series has been made possible by the support of the Friends of the Thomas Crane Library. Professor Del Case is returning every Wednesday evening in August for 4 music history programs. These programs are absolutely fabulous and a great way to deepen your appreciation for music you've loved for years, as well as increase your appreciation for music that perhaps never caught your attention before. I recently got an opportunity to talk with Del about this series. I hope you like our conversation. Really excited. I am talking with Professor Delvin Case about a fabulous series we're having every Wednesday in August this summer, all on music history. And we're going to be basing it around 4 different themes. Del, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We've been having a lot of fun. We had, you approached me it was early in, I think, the pandemic. We didn't know how long this was going to last. And we had some great guided listening tours and conversations with folks, in the spring and in early summer. And then, things erupted again and we're, still enduring this quarantine. People who saw your background before will see that you're in a different place now. So personal lives continue and change. But we persist, and we have music that has been around for decades and continues to be a life-giving force. So I'm really excited that you're going to join us and help us, really understand that heartbeat and how it's, progressed over the years. How are these courses that we're doing now? How do you envision them as being different than what we've done already?
Well, you and I have talked about some of the pros of the guided listening discussions we've done, but one thing that we haven't had as much of a focus on has been the historical sort of component of the music that we've listened to. That's been really learning how the songs work, maybe learning a little bit about how they address or reflect the issues of the day. But what we decided in our conversation was to really try to take a look at how music provides a way for us to understand some certain trends or themes in American history and American society. So we are going to be starting, I believe, with protest music or music that engages with topics of the day or political issues of the day. You may immediately think of someone like Bob Dylan and Blowin' in the Wind. But of course, within the sort of the general category of protest music is something like gangster rap, which of course was in the late 80s and even now is raising questions and challenging the world to explain how it's treating African Americans and how it thinks of urban communities. We can also look at other kinds of folk songs that have been written ever since the 60s that have addressed other issues that have become more and more important in American society since then, like, for example, LGBTQ issues or environmentalism, for example, or feminism. And there's even a song like Born in the USA, which many people think is a patriotic song. And you know what? It is, but it's a song that's about upbraiding America for not treating Vietnam War veterans as America really should treat them. So that's an example of a protest song that many people don't even know is a protest song. And it doesn't sound like a guy with a guitar, right? It's a rock anthem, but it's a protest song.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, there's a lot of different examples. And I like that you bring up, there's a lot of protests today and there's a lot of people out in the streets. And I'm sure we'll tie into that, but it's also there's something kind of internal in this country that we've been experiencing protest for a long time. So definitely seems like an appropriate lens.
When you think about it, what's amazing about popular music as a place for protest is that if you look historically, popular music has been one of the very few arenas where non-dominant groups, people who don't normally have a voice in the public square, do have a place. It doesn't take a lot of money to record a 3-minute song, but the impact can be amazing. If you want to write, produce, and direct a feature film, you got to have a lot of connections. You got to have a lot of access. You got to have a certain kind of training. You got to be part of the system, man. But if you're a rapper with a microphone and a message, you have access in ways that you don't in other media. So that's another exciting way we can see as protest music has changed over the last 50 years. We also see it being ahead of the curve when it comes to the different kinds of voices that it allows into the discussion.
I can think of so many examples of protest music as well, or just how music itself can move across borders. And so a lot of times when we're talking about, boundaries or restrictions on people's movement or the way people have been cast in different categories, I'm reminded of a couple different things. I'm reminded of Bob Marley and how, when reggae, the reggae genre that he popularized so much was, from all my understanding, was originally like the music of the people who worked in the yard in Jamaica. It was not music that everybody listened to. But then when he took it on the world stage, it took not just this music and this beat, but the message that came with it, and was able to unite people all over about, one love and how people need to figure out how to come together. But then he also, embodied it with the music, with the words of Haile Selassie and the condemnation of war and how we're always going to be at war until people are fed. And then I'm thinking about, concerts today that are being held on either side of the American-Mexican border, and how people, just by the act of coming together, can be, music can be a form of protest, just as you're playing music when, musicians are divided by a 30-foot wall, but still finding ways to bridge connections across that border, even when there's a physical barrier. So because music flows into our ears, it can't be held back by a border, especially when we can stream it on the internet and share it with everybody. It's a really awesome free tool. And I mean, yeah, I'm sure we could do an entire semester worth of material here, because I'm thinking then of, music that's been used almost like, you hear about the U.S. Army using music to drive out dictators, we can drive people crazy with a certain type of metal music or something. And that could be a form of protest, like no peace, like we're going to disrupt you until you can't take it anymore.
Yeah, that leads to the idea of music essentially as a form of protest, even if the song might not be. So you can think about the pirate radio stations in the 50s off the coast of England, where the BBC wasn't allowing rock and roll to be played. But if you had a radio tower on a boat, you could literally sail into international waters and broadcast that music that really started to change British, uptight British society, And I'm sure Chuck Berry didn't think of his music as being revolutionary or protest music, but it ended up being both.
It was used as that, yeah. Well, another way that people protest sometimes is in partying. And so the second session we're going to do isn't, maybe we'll continue this conversation. We talk about protests. We talk about, I certainly think about, when you think about the 60s, since we're going to be looking at this kind of by decades, you can imagine, or you can think back to the political activists and the people that were protesting the Vietnam War and a lot of protests there. But then you can also think of people dropping out and saying, enough with all this. We don't want to take it anymore. We're just life is going to be a continual party, and we're going to just go on these mind expanding trips. And so that was kind of what I was thinking when I was thinking of the party music and how that's evolved over the years, because in some ways, is it a protest or, there's different ways that we just enjoy hanging out with each other and framing what is important to us. So I'm curious where you're thinking about taking the discussion about party music, because this is different than dance music, which we're going to cover later and we can talk about. But there's something about just how we choose to hang out and share this alternative view almost of reality, I'm thinking, than what we do when we're just walking down the street.
Yeah, it is somewhat hard to extricate from dance. But what you mentioned is a great example, of course, the 60s. And we're not just talking about really the use of substances, but it's the whole idea of music as advocating or being an avenue towards an expansion of consciousness, right? Which is a way of dropping out, but it's also a way of saying, hey, there's a different way the world can be. So there's, of course, a lot of music in the 60s that's about spirituality, even, but what you're saying in terms of party music, definitely the new kinds of substances and practices that become sort of common in music of the 60s. I mean, that goes back to the 50s, where it's talking about different kinds of dance. I read somewhere that the first social dance in American history that was ever done without a partner was the twist. You think about what an incredible change that is, that all the, not the contra dance, but like all the society dances, they all required a partner in a series of steps. And the twist, you just stood there and twisted. That
you don't
really
have to have an even number of partners anymore. You
right,
can have 3 or 5 people can dance together, and it's not awkward.
Yeah.
It's super awkward.
No. So I think that this whole division between party and dance is hard. But another way I can think of it is how the origins of disco music in the early 70s really transformed how Americans socialized, because it was really these these underground clubs, particularly gay clubs on Fire Island and Long Island, they would, for the first time ever since they had a DJ for dancing, which by the way is a weird thing when you think about it. Who would go out and pay money to hear someone play records? Why can't they do that at home? Well, these clubs became an environment for a gay subculture, but eventually the major contribution is the idea of the all-night party, the idea that you start dancing at 10 o'clock and you go till 6 a.m., right? Americans didn't do that before, and that's some music that came from the underground community and eventually that's how people do it today, whether it's the rave, right? So, yeah.
And then you had the response, in some ways you had people responding to the excesses of the instrumental rock solos and the disco era going into punk and saying, okay, when we hang out, we're, enough of your like highfalutin ideas and just letting it all be. We're into being intense and tight. And when we hang and party, we want to be like really serious about it. But like, that's how we, we strip away all the pretense.
Right. What's
and the hardcore scene, right?
Classic dance is the pogo. You just jump up and down.
Yeah, exactly. How do we strip it down to basic movement?
Yeah, there's nothing left at that point to dance. It's not even as complicated as the twist.
Right.
It's even easier to do than the twist. It's still dance. Would you call punk dance music? No, but
it's party music. I could be to a punk party.
Yeah, they poke, but people do dance. They move.
Oh, absolutely.
They pogo. They crowd.
Yeah. You just go and slam, be in a mosh pit somewhere. Yeah. Well, you're talking about all-night parties and Fire Island. Let me naturally think of the third session we're going to do, which is love songs. And there have been so many different types of love songs and even different ways that we can celebrate love. All sorts of metaphors for love and different acts of ways people express love and other things. So I think that's going to be really fun too. We're going to probably change the pace a little bit when we look at those personal relationships. And there's lots of people that have been single. When we talk about love songs, it's not just for people in relationships. I was just listening to an interview with John Legend the other day, and he was talking about how he has written, many love songs when he was not in any relationship himself. So a lot of times love songs are aspirational or for people that are, kind of missing love. So.
Oh yeah. And you can definitely get the pulse of society by looking at the kinds of love that are described. We are always one step away from sex when we talk about love in popular music, which is also one step away from dance. But I think some of the themes that we could cover could include gender roles in relationships. Look, I think a few months ago at this point, we looked at Drive My Car by the Beatles and how there was such a revolutionary song about gender dynamics. Another song would be Norwegian Wood, which is another song by John Lennon that has a really interesting gender dynamic in terms of who has the power. And that, if you don't know that song, we'll probably cover it. Of course, there's the idea of the torch song, right, and how that's changed. And if we basically look in the 60s and 70s, you can even look at Respect by Aretha Franklin, which is a cover of an Otis Redding song. And in Aretha's hands, it becomes about a relationship and about what love is. But to say, if you basically respect I'm about to give you all my money, but all I ask in return, honey, is give me some respect, right? She's singing it from her perspective, right? Because she's the one who goes out and works. So love and power are not very far from sex as well. And we can use that lens often as well. And this doesn't even, I'm sure we'll get into same-sex love, which starts to become more common in folk music in the 80s and then in the 90s with Melissa Etheridge and songs that are about that. So, we can talk a lot about love songs without just talking about, there were birds in the skies and I never heard them sing it. There are lots of other ways to talk about love. Oh,
absolutely. Yeah. And I don't think we have to even get modern necessarily to explore different ways people are loving each other. If you look at, famous, out performers, all the way, we can go far back. If we look at the 70s, we're looking at Elton John and so much of the disco scene was certainly, the Village People. We're not talking about straight sex. Well,
it's interesting you raised this.
It appealed to everybody too.
Well, and then of course the other question is how explicit does the message have to be, right? That's another question.
So the Village People are certainly not just talking about, their approach was not from straight sex, but they were definitely getting hot and heavy and appealing to a large number of people.
Yeah, and the question is, how explicit do you need to be about the kind of love you're talking about?
Right.
And so the answer to that depends sort of on a lot of factors. And if you track that, if you track that, it reveals a lot about American society. I think very few straight people knew that the image of the muscular sort of cop, the big beard mustache in the 70s was a gay icon. Didn't matter. Music was great. So
people loved Freddie Mercury, and a lot of people, when he was performing on stage, had no idea what his personal life was all about. It was a universal theme. Yeah.
And, related to that is the idea of the close connection in pop music history between romantic love and spirituality, or the transcendent. And you see this in the end of the 60s really clearly with the connection between a sense of spirituality and a oneness, which is both mystical as well as physical, which of course goes back 1,000 years, at least in the Christian tradition, to the mystic, nuns who would have these mystical relationships with Jesus. So another story, but it's not a new thing. But when you see a band like Velvet Underground release a song called Jesus in like 1969, where all they do is chant Jesus over and over a drone. I mean, I don't think any of them were practicing Christians, but for them, the sense of oneness and unity and meditation that went along with sort of the counterculture could be understood within the context of something very specific, like actually Jesus. So that's kind of a divine love, so we can cover that as well.
We got a lot of ground to cover. Yeah. It's going to be exciting. And the last one, we talked about, we've talked about protest, we've talked about party music, we've talked about love, and we bring it all back, full circle with dance music, because we've talked about it already. But I just want to encourage everybody to stick through to the end, because I forget who it was that said, I don't want to be a part of your revolution if I can't dance. So let's make sure that we're moving and figuring out how to translate this just out of our heads and into our feet and our bodies, so that we can.
Some of the great dance music. I might put on my music theorist cap and look under the hood and explain why some of these great dance songs work so well to get your feet moving, even though they might be separated by 50 years.
Yeah, and I think it would be fascinating to listen to some of the different influences. I know we've talked in the past about kind of how Latin music influenced rock and roll and really changed the beat. And when I think about hot dances, some of the Latin dances and then the evolution of Latin dance, we could do a whole class just in that. Because it's been wildly popular and it keeps kind of coming back in. So I'm sure we're going to uncover a lot of topics for future conversations, which is exciting. I always love returning to this.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm super excited. I hope people tune in. We will be streaming it. We'll be doing it live here on Zoom, and people can tune in live on Facebook and YouTube. We will also be archiving them, because as people who've experienced this before have realized that, anytime we throw it up on YouTube, even though I mark it as private, so because I know we're using copyrighted materials, people probably don't know this, but I get copyright blocks for every different little snippet that we play just by the robots out of YouTube. But what's really exciting, and I know I've shared this with you already, but I'll share it with everybody else who's watching us, is that QATV has video on demand. And because they understand that we're not violating any copyright here, they're totally comfortable putting these videos up online. And so we can make links available and help people find all the past programs on the QATV video on demand. And we'll be able to put these future programs out there too afterwards. But people really should join live, because the ability to talk back and forth and to contribute to the conversation is definitely welcome. We love looking at the chat and getting the feedback from folks, because music brings us together. So
absolutely, and people can also even help determine what we're going to cover the next week.
Absolutely, we can figure out what's resonating. Yeah,
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Del. I'm really excited about it. I look forward to seeing you every week in August. It'll be great.
Zygmunt J.B. Platter is an environmental professor of law at Boston College Law School. He'll be joining us on Tuesday, August 11th, to tell us about his work as chair of the State of Alaska Oil Spill Commission's Legal Research Task Force investigating the Exxon Valdez disaster, and what lessons we can learn from this experience to help us with today's global problems. This program is co-sponsored by Quincy CAN, the Quincy Climate Action Network.
Welcome. I'm joined today by David Reich, the board chair for the Quincy Climate Action Network, we are very excited to be partnering with for a special program with Dr. Zig Platter. Dr. Platter, Zig, works at Boston College Law School and was the chair of the State of Alaska Oil Spill Commission's Legal Research Task Force investigating the Exxon Valdez spill. And he's going to talk to us about his experiences there and lessons that we can learn. So, Zig, David, thank you so much for joining me today. It's really an honor and a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks for having us.
David, perhaps you could say a couple words about, how you met Zig and how the Quincy Climate Action Network is excited to work with him and to talk about this issue today.
I met Zig actually through my professional work as a reporter for Boston College Law magazine, and I've had the pleasure of interviewing Zig a number of times, and came to learn recently about his work with the Alaska state investigation of the Exxon oil spill, and his characterization of the problems leading up to and immediately following the oil spill, and his identification of what he calls iron triangles as the ultimate source of the problems that made the oil spill almost inevitable, and that also made the cleanup much less successful than it could have been. And it occurred to me that some of the same forces are operating today as we confront the climate crisis, and I thought Zig could take some of his wisdom acquired in the Alaska situation and apply it to what we're facing today.
I really am grateful that you made the introduction for us, David, and that the local Climate Action Network is interested in helping us learn from the resources that we have here so we can figure out what we can do going forward. Zig, thanks for joining us. How did you, so you obviously did this work, it was over 20 years ago, the Exxon Valdez spill was, how long ago was it now?
1989.
1989.
But I got a call from Alaska because one of my old students, when I was teaching at Harvard, was up in Alaska, and they had to handle this massive oil spill and didn't have anybody ready to hand. So he said, well, why don't you call my professor? And so I called and was delighted to take on that job because it was clear it was a milestone in environmental history. And it was interesting because when I talked with David about it, you have to know many journalists don't have the smarts that David has. And so when he asked me to come to this Quincy session, I said, yes, I know it will be an interesting session. But the idea is that we are in the midst now of really remarkable crises. The climate crisis and the COVID-19 crisis, sometimes when you go back in time to a milestone case, you can see things maybe a little bit more clearly. And so that's what David suggested, that we go back in history to that case that my students and I got deeply involved with and see what it can tell us about today.
That makes a lot of sense. David was talking about iron triangles, and I know that term may be new. It's a phrase that I haven't heard described in that way, so I'm excited to get to that. But I know that you have a couple images that to help us appreciate just a kind of small sample of what you're going to talk about at this program. So maybe you want to go ahead and share your screen and we can look at those, because I know we were looking at them just a little bit ago before we turned on the recording, and iron triangles comes up a little bit later in that. So here we are. These are samples of some of the slides that you'll be sharing in the program. So we're not going to spend a lot of time. There's going to be certainly things that come up on these slides, I'm sure, that we're not going to go into detail right now. People will have to attend the program to learn the details, but this will give people a sense. So these are your students from Alaska.
These are students from Boston,
Okay.
from Harvard and from BC. How did I make that mistake? Because the budget for the commission wasn't very great. And so I said, I need free labor, no credit, no money, 5 people, and I got 17 people who worked through the commission what we're looking at is the landscape. The dotted line is the tanker route from Valdez down to Long Beach, Los Angeles, where the oil is refined. And you know the difference between single-hulled and double-hulled tankers, is that right?
Well, I would assume the difference is one hull.
And which do you think is safer, single or double?
I would assume if I was doing a belt and suspenders versus just a belt, that the belt and suspenders would be a better approach. So I would assume that the double hull would also likewise be a better approach, a safer approach.
You got it. These ships were longer than 3 football fields, and the oil was separated from the ocean by 1 1/8 inches of steel.
Just one hull.
It isn't rusty.
Wow.
And so that's part of the story too, because the President of the United States was pressured by a corrupt decision not to have double-hulled tankers, which would have prevented this accident in the first place. And the red line is the pipeline from the northern slope of Alaska, coming down over 2 mountain ranges. By the way, earthquake zones just about parallel that red line as well.
Oof.
Loading onto the tankers and then going off down to Long Beach. It is a mega system, and it turned out it had mega problems. And the surveillance of this system by federal and state and international bodies was really incredibly complacent. And that's part of the story as well. So I thought it might be good to go back to a story from 30 years ago and see lessons that could be drawn about resilient, adaptive government, what can go wrong and what could go right, and bring it, guess what, to the 2 major existential crises that you and I and all of us are currently facing. But we would get there through the Exxon Valdez. This is a schematic of the moment that it hits Bly Reef. And I guess you know what those white dots are, right?
I assume they're icebergs.
Yeah. So the ship was avoiding the icebergs, but it avoided a little too much.
It got too close, and that's actually, I mean, we can even see that. That looks like a rock that would have been avoidable. Was it a high tide and they couldn't actually see it? Or, I mean, I'm sure they had instruments, but.
Well, the story is that the captain was drunk. The reality is that the ship was being run by a skeleton crew. The only person at the wheel hadn't slept for more than 18 hours and should have had 2 officers with him and didn't. The captain had 3 drinks that afternoon, but we were told he was a better captain drunk than most captains were sober. It was an accident that was bound to happen because of the way that the government and the corporation had minimized safety. Guess why? Every minimization saved money. And you're looking at the result.
I assume it wasn't a skeleton crew because they were taken out by sickness. It was a skeleton crew because they didn't want to hire more people.
The ship was designed for 36 seamen. Guess how many were running the ship at that point?
12?
Yeah, 16.
16. That's still ridiculous. Wow.
And the shore crews that had been in charge of loading it had been fired to save $250,000. And so the crew of 16 had to load the ship instead of sleeping. Do you get the idea?
That's hard work, I imagine.
This wasn't a drunk captain.
Yeah.
It was a system.
Sig, tell us what the captain was doing when the ship ran aground.
The captain had said to the guy at the wheel, "We have to stay away from the ice blocks so you can divert to port to the left side." And the guy did so but he was so sleepy he put it on autopilot, and the captain went downstairs because he had to do the bursar's records, the treasury, the accounts for the turnaround, because the company had fired the bursar in order to save $150 million of support over time. And it was crazy. He was doing an accountant's work. The accountant was being paid something like $75,000 a year, penny wise, pound foolish, billions of dollars, and you're looking at the results. The results really were horrible. I don't know, Clayton, you weren't around, but David, you saw these pictures on TV, right?
I was around then. I remember this. Yeah.
Well, Clayton, you were a child, I think, but obviously a sophisticated
89,
television.
yeah, I was in high school. So,
So, I mean, but you can see the oiled wildlife was tragic.
It was.
But the vast number of wildlife that got oiled died. The beaches, they're very rocky, were sprayed to clean them. Do you see? I'm on a beach that has just been cleaned so the vice president could walk on it and declare a victory. But if you lifted the rocks and put your hands in, there was oil underneath all of those rocks. The cleanup, in other words, was something that was not going to be done anytime soon. But over on the right, do you see that spray?
The hazmat suit and the spray, yeah.
Yeah, and tell me, if you were spraying with a hazmat suit, would you wear a ventilator or not?
I would think I'd be wearing a ventilator. Yeah.
That's the correct answer. Do you see a ventilator there?
No.
No, you don't. And furthermore, the dispersant that they're spraying is dangerous. One of those guys came over to me and whispered, that spray we're spraying, most of us are peeing blood.
Ooh.
I said, "Oh." He said, it's coming through our skin. We're peeing blood. But we don't want to tell the foreman because they'd send us back to the lower 48 instead of paying us.
They needed the job, yeah.
Our commission learned this stuff and put it into a bunch of recommendations. And remember, David, out of 59 recommendations, 58 were ignored, and they could have stopped the Deepwater Horizon blowout. But 20 years later, all was forgotten. It's interesting. Systems, the bigger they are, sometimes the less capable they are of careful management. And so there are lessons to be drawn from that. Part of the lessons we can talk about are prevention before the fact, and you have to prepare for response after the fact. And this is the ideal. Adaptive management, feedback loops, which didn't exist in Alaska, didn't exist with Deepwater Horizon. Plus the non-regression principle. Once you get an advance protecting the public, like the recommendations of our commission, you don't turn around and go in the opposite direction, even though the pressures of profit often count against public protections. And also, we can say something about subsidiarity. This comes from canon law, from the church, but the decision should be made as low as possible. And guess who knew most about the dangers of a potential oil spill and what was needed to clean up? Do you think it was the federal government? Do you think it was the state government? Do you think it was Exxon? Or do you think it was the fishermen, the local people who lived and watched and worked there day by day?
Maybe some of those guys who were peeing blood. Yeah. Listen to those guys.
It again. Yeah. And that's part of what we'll look at as well. Because the lessons aren't just ancient history. This is the curve of CO2 and global warming. And look at it. Back in 1965, we knew that this was coming. And we knew how to stop it. And the oil industry knew it was coming and knew how to stop it. And instead, our governing system, but not just in the United States, but internationally, let the curve go the way it's going. And Quincy could be underwater by the end of the century. But a lot of terrible things are happening already in Miami, and global warming is not just on the seashores, it's all over. And so David's group can tell you all of the impacts of climate that could have been avoided if we'd taken the lessons of the Exxon Valdez, and its impacts on the weakest populations in terms of political power, as well as on all of us. And then obviously, this is another problem that could have been mitigated, never completely avoided, but mitigated, and instead look at the curve. Look at that green curve. That's the United States. And lessons from an oil spill could have, and still could make, a difference to every one of the people in this audience, to you, to me, to David, and to the people who are least possible power-deprived populations that are going to suffer the worst from COVID-19 and the worst from climate. Hey, systemic change is on the way, and there are lessons to be learned.
So, Sig, David mentioned something earlier that you had also mentioned when we were looking at a couple of these final slides here about iron triangles. Maybe you could say, what is this idea of an iron triangle? How did that, what were the iron triangles? What are you referring to when you say that?
When I first went to Washington, I was a law professor in Tennessee, and I was helping farmers with a case against the most marginal, the last of 68 TVA dams. And it was going to destroy incredible farmland for a corrupt land deal. I mean,
this is the Tennessee Valley Authority, right?
Tennessee Valley Authority, and which has done some wonderful things and has done some terrible things. So I went to Washington with a lot of facts and a lot of farmers, and we were trying to get the attention of the government agencies and of the media. And I was told by other public interest citizen representatives, you're up against an iron triangle. What does that mean? I said, I don't know what an iron triangle is. What really runs the government of the United States, in every state and probably every nation state in the world, is the power of the market economy, the industrial economy, and the power against regulation. The agencies are another prong of the triangle. They've been created to represent the public interest against the excesses of the market. And then the third prong is the legislature, or a political bloc in power that empowers the whole thing. And what I found then, and what you'll find here, the fossil fuel industry is the most powerful prong of an iron triangle. The agencies that try to control fossil fuel obviously have a difficult time up against the campaign finance paid to the legislature. The legislators who owe it to the fossil fuel industry. It can make you cynical or it can make you realistic. And we have to be realistic and figure out, okay, we need systemic change. It's going to come from the media. It's going to come from the public. It's going to come probably from way down, not from way up. And
back to let's look at the... Well, there is definitely some hope that if we can listen, and there are lots of people turning out. There are people in Quincy, in the Climate Action Network. There's you and your work to help inspire folks. And I think we see examples all around the world. So while these are incredibly distressing times, I think there's also a lot of reasons for hope. So I hope that we can take lessons here and sound the call so that people do pay attention and look to figure out how do we listen to the voices that are seeing the next, rock to the right, to the left of the iceberg.
As
Steering us through.
John Lewis said, when you look at all the forces against the real public interest, there is a way if you can get in the way of what's going wrong. And so that involves voting and thinking the way David's group is thinking, the way all of us have to think. Systemic change is on the way. What looked radical just a couple of years ago is now necessary.
Well, I, for one, certainly hope that we can spur some thought and some action. So I appreciate you helping contribute. David, I really appreciate you and your work, and am grateful that we can help bring these provocative ideas that the kind of change you're talking about did seem unthinkable even 6 months ago. But maybe with some of the wake-up calls and the way that people have been affected in our lives, in our homes, in these last several months, will come to personally realize that we need to do things differently, and there are different ways we can care for each other and listen to each other. So I appreciate you lending your voices and efforts to this action. Thank you. I'm speaking today with Professor Karima Lewis, who is going to be presenting here at the library on Tuesday, August 18th, starting at 7 o'clock. We will be, when I say presenting here, she will be joining us online. We'll be presenting this by Zoom, YouTube, and Facebook. The subject of the program is Policing Black Bodies, from Slavery to Black Lives Matter. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Professor Lewis, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to be presenting another program with you.
Thank you for having me.
So I was so delighted that we were able to get in touch when I reached out earlier this summer, and that you were teaching a class earlier on similar subject. Tell me a little bit, remind me of what that class was and where that was being taught.
Okay, so this was a 2-week course at Massasoit Community College in Brockton, Mass. And it's a 1-credit free course for the students. And we called the course Racism and Resistance. And so we wanted to look at the history of racism and civil rights protests and resistance from different perspectives. And so my contribution was the historical perspective, looking at policing from the colonial period through the Civil War, Reconstruction, the era of lynching, the Great Migration, on through the Civil Rights Movement. Other parts of the program had to do with the whole ideology around racism as far as a sociological perspective, looking at those theories about racism, implicit racism. I can't really talk for this professor, but such ideas as implicit racism, and as well as from a literature perspective, looking how Black voices protest and write about these kind of problems of racism, poverty, and crime in all the areas that sometimes are important issues to African Americans. And the last professor brought a perspective from human services. And so when you think about African Americans and the stress of racism, the stress of police brutality, the poverty, I think the goal of the professor was to let people know that there are resources that can help you weather some of these difficulties that might be part of the African American experience in America. So I thought that was kind of neat, because we always think about the problem, and we never think about the treatment and solutions to problems. So I thought that was a neat package to kind of look at this issue of racism.
Yeah. So we're obviously not going to be able to present a full credit course that took 2 weeks to deliver in 70, 90-minute, package. So you're going to give some highlights from the historical perspective, and then hopefully we can end with some of those resources that people can find. I don't know if we can bring any of that in, but I do like that spin.
Well, being a former social worker, I might be able to put on that hat and help well with that. But the literature one, I might not do too well with, or sociology.
We have lots of we have lots of books and resources, so we can support people who want to go deeper into that for sure.
All right.
Well, when we think about the history, I'd like to talk just a little bit about it so people can know where we're going in. I know that today there is a gross difference between the percent of population that is Black people and the percent of incarcerated people that are Black. Is that something that has held true over, kind of the history of this country? Has it kind of gone up and down as, how reflective is our current experience with our history?
Okay. And so I think we have to start from the beginning.
Okay.
And I think you have to understand when you think about the problem of mass incarceration, you have to consider the problem of policing. And how this mass incarceration can take place, because the police is the one who's going to be doing the arresting and the incarceration. And so you have to start with, what's the history of policing Black people in this country, and how has that history looked, and how did it evolve to a problem of mass incarceration? And so we start from the beginning. We start from the colonial period, and we start with when our country had legal slavery and slave patrols. And it's interesting, when I started my research for this class, and I went back, I teach African American history, and I kind of went back to my textbooks, and no one talked about slave patrols in these books. And so I found that quite interesting, because it was such a big part of slavery. And basically, these slave patrols from the 1600s, the model that they used was from Barbados. Barbados, the Caribbean, was known for its brutal enforcement against enslaved people there. And
they were using for the sugar. The foundation was sugar, and you need a lot of people to harvest sugar cane.
But there was just, first of all, even our slave laws come from Barbados. South Carolina, one of the first colonies, the founders are from Barbados. And so very, very stringent slave laws. Like if you run away the second time, you could lose your ear. Mutilation kind of thing. So this is the foundation of our slave laws, and the slave patrol came from. And basically these slave patrols, most people think they're there to catch runaways, but that's not their main job. Their main job was to monitor, put under surveillance, to watch every movement enslaved people did.
So you wouldn't even think of running away. It's too dangerous. They just wanted to keep people just working all the time. Yeah.
Well, they did run away now.
Okay.
Wherever there's slavery, there's resistance.
Course, people want to be free. Yeah.
Right. But the slave patrol basically were on, they were working during the night. And there was and most of the colonies, including Massachusetts and Connecticut and nice New England, there was a curfew, and everybody seemed to have this 9 p.m. curfew. And if you're caught out wandering, visiting your friends or whatever, and you don't have a written pass, even in Massachusetts, you would be hauled in, put in jail. Your master have to come and bail you out of there. But that, when you were incarcerated, well, not incarcerated, just put in jail, you could be whipped. And so I had my students to look at some regulations of the patrols. And one of the regulations is that you could be whipped with 15 lashes.
After curfew.
Huh?
Just for being out after curfew.
After curfew. Now, during the day, enslaved people could walk and take care of the master's business. They could be on official business. But even on Sunday, You weren't allowed to say, if you lived in the country, to go into the town unless you were going to church or unless you're going to visit your spouse who might have lived in the town. And so these laws and restrictions controlled the movements of enslaved people. Now, patrols would get involved in recapturing runaways, but slave catchers, these were separately employed people who were employed specifically to go after runaways.
Those
and that
are the
means
bounty hunters of the day.
They could cross state lines. Slave patrols could not. They worked in their community. And so, and they made a little more. Slave catchers made a little more. But other people, ordinary citizens, could get a reward. And overseers could go after those on their plantation. So you had all of these individuals involved in slave catching. And so this phenomenon of slave patrols will continue. It'll continue through the American Revolution in the South, because we know slavery will continue in the South, but in the North, of course, they began to abolish slavery. But even through the antebellum period, that period just before the Civil War, slave patrols are very busy monitoring and controlling the lives of enslaved people. We find after the Civil War that there's going to be revamping, but they don't go away. They remain with us. Because after the Civil War and Reconstruction, we have a period where basically Southern planters, former Southern planters or plantation owners, wanted to get enslaved people back on the plantation, whatever it took. And so we have the system of sharecropping that finally develops, and they rent a piece of
slavery, basically. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Without any benefits. That's right.
Right. Well, there's a well-known book out today, Slavery by Another Name. Mm-hmm. And this is basically slavery. It's called convict leasing because it's really a system that just took away all the liberties. And these are newly freed people. We're talking about post-Reconstruction, newly freed people.
Well, and this is because emancipation said that people could no longer be enslaved unless they were prisoners.
Excellent. And they found how they called it convict leasing, kind of. And so basically, you could be arrested. Of course, they said you owe debts that you didn't owe to the plantation.
I can just say you owe a debt. They're going to take my word on it. So that in itself is my word. You owe me some money, so you go to jail, and now you can work for me for free. Yeah.
And you know that you don't really owe it, but you can't say it. You can't contest it and say, I don't owe it. And so you find yourself in what they had debt peonage camps where you had to work off 3 years. And then while you're in these camps, if you tried to run away, that slave patrol that's supposed to be no more after the Civil War, those are the people that came after you. Ooh. And by the early 1900s, we have the KKK or the Ku Klux Klan, who's working hand in hand with this revamped slave patrol. But there were minor offenses like growing cotton after sunset.
Growing cotton after sunset? How can you control when cotton grows? In your cotton, you might have a little cotton patch, but you couldn't work it after sunset. Just minor type of rules and regulations. And so you're put in prison or debt peonage camp if you owe too much money. Mm-hmm. I had my students to read a report of one of these debt peonage camps, and the man talked about getting this 3-year sentence, being forced to sign saying he owed the debt. But he also talked about his wife being sexually assaulted by the white bosses and forced to have children. And his son was given away. Oh. Now, this is 1904. What?
1904 in Elbert County, Georgia. Oh. And this is the Reconstruction, policing of bodies, Black bodies, where the rights are denied to African Americans. And
that's putting it lightly. Yeah.
yes. And so, and then when the Ku Klux Klan is organized, the terror, you know, of being, your home being broken into, you snatched out of your home and probably lynched. We know that over 4,000, and the number probably isn't even accurate,
right,
of African Americans. Vigilante policing of Black bodies. This is not within the law. This is outside of the law. Someone calls lynching public murder being done by the public. And even through the Great Migration, okay, we got an opportunity, we're gonna go north, World War I, World War II, there are jobs. Whites in the South would have laws that said African Americans cannot leave during harvest time. When the crops are, they were not allowed to leave.
Not allowed to leave.
Not allowed to leave. Sometimes they would go to the train station and try to stop them from getting on the train to go north.
Wow.
And so even during the Great Migration, we're talking about from 1920 to maybe 1940 or 50. That's when you have so many race riots because Blacks are coming to white communities, they're coming to white jobs. Whites said, we're not going to work with them, we're going to strike, we're not going to work because we don't want to work with Black people. It's like in 1 year, 1919, it's called the Red Summer, because so many African Americans died during race riots. I believe it was, I think it was during World War II, one particular year, there were like almost 250 race riots across the country.
So what is a race riot? I don't think really does justice to what was happening. It's not like it was two groups of people that were like, you know, head to head. It was really a mob of white people that were killing everybody they could find. Is that right?
That's right. And setting fires. We think of Tulsa.
Right.
Tulsa, Oklahoma, that was destroyed. And so it was really out and out war on African Americans. I was reading recently, and I read so much I have to keep track, but I was reading recently, because I know it's someone that has a connection to Wilmington, North Carolina, when there was an attack on Black families, and over like 250 Black families just moved because their lives were in danger by whites because something had happened that they, you know, so, and that happened across the country, not just.
There was a movie, what was it? Was it Rosewood in Florida?
Yes.
Yes. Just murder.
Yes. So policing outside the law, vigilante policing, and we see this continues. We know that even in World War II, when Black soldiers are in military bases and they try and just go have some free time when they're off the base and they're attacked by communities and so this kind of racial terror, racial violence that they face. And then we continue into the civil rights movement. And we know, even just commemorating John Lewis, how
what happened on the bridge in Selma.
In Selma, the blood that was shed for the Voting Rights Act, basically. But also Birmingham, Alabama, with the chief of police, Bull Connor, and the dogs, and also the bombing of the Baptist church with the four girls. I mean, someone said that it wasn't Birmingham, it was Bombingham, you know. And so policing Black bodies with that kind of racial terror is also. And so we move, and I haven't forgotten your question, because I think that the problem that we have with mass incarceration today is not something that we saw before the civil rights movement. I think this is something in reaction to the Black Power movement, the Black Panthers, that hyper-masculine image with the guns drawn, really kind of brought fear into a lot of
as it was intended. I mean,
Yeah.
they wanted to strike some fear.
their response was to police brutality. And they said, we're going to put a stop to police brutality, and this is how we're going to do it. And I think this is the beginning where you see, because we know all of the Black Panthers are charged falsely with crimes. They're incarcerated.
They were not just murdered, right?
Right. Oh, some of them died. Angela Davis, we know that she was accused, but she represented herself and got acquitted, of killing someone.
Take care. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure talking to everyone. Bye-bye.
So that was just part of my conversation with Dr. Karima Lewis, who will be presenting here at the library on Tuesday, August 18th at 7 p.m. We will be live on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. The subject of her program is Policing Black Bodies from Slavery to Black Lives Matter. I hope you will come back and join us for a much longer presentation. It promises to be engaging.
We're partnering again with the Boston Vegetarian Society for another Cooking with Colin program on Thursday evening, August 20th at 7. This time, Colin's going to teach us the secrets to several smoothies that taste like Girl Scout cookies. And these smoothies are actually good for you. I had an opportunity to catch up with Colin recently in his kitchen and talk about these recipes.
I'm joined today by my friend Colin McCullough, who's going to talk about a fabulous program we have coming up all about smoothies that taste like Girl Scout cookies. Now, we already had smoothies that taste like desserts, but this is taking it to another level. Colin, I know you were telling me that you've actually started and you've written the, kind of a mini cookbook, if you will, that you're going to be self-publishing as soon as, things that the stars align correctly and everything works. But you've been doing a lot of research to get these flavors just right. So,
right.
How are you inspired? Like, this is kind of a genius idea to have a smoothie that tastes like a Girl Scout cookie. Tell us about the occasion when this actually happened, when it came to you.
Sure. Well, actually, I was writing the dessert recipes for the cookbook that has been published, the Healthy Vegan Cookbook, and there's 30 different smoothie recipes, and they're really designed to taste like dessert. So, we did some of those in one of the previous classes, but when I was writing one of the recipes, I tried to make a smoothie that tasted like peanut butter cookies. And so I really liked the recipe, how it came out, that's in the book. But, as I was writing the recipe and trying it out, I really thought like, this kind of tastes somewhat like the peanut butter Girl Scout cookie. And so I decided to try and tweak it and see how close I could get, and so I was so excited, I got just the right combination, and it's so good. It was great. And it uses all whole food, healthy ingredients. So
it's even better than a Girl Scout cookie. It tastes like a Girl Scout cookie, but it takes it to another level. That's awesome. Very cool.
I mean, who doesn't love Girl Scout cookies? But, from a health standpoint, it's kind of hard to indulge sometimes. So if you can have something that's healthy that tastes, pretty similar to that, then that's great. So when I wrote that first recipe, and I thought, well, let me try it just as kind of a challenge. There's 10 different Girl Scout recipes, Girl Scout cookie recipes, and or flavors, I should say. And so I sort of set about as a challenge of, can I recreate the flavors of each one of these things, each one of these cookie flavors, but with whole food healthy ingredients. And so I was, I spent a lot of time working on that. My kids got to be my taste testers quite a bit, which
I'm sure that was not hard to convince them to do.
Yeah, so I wrote out and tested the 10 recipes, and so I wrote the whole little mini book out, and all the pictures are taken. So now it's just being edited, and then I'll self-publish that on Amazon. But yeah, it's been a fun little project.
And people who attend this class will get to learn 4 of them, I assume. That's what we've been doing for the previous ones.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
A teaser,
4 out of 10.
Almost half of the book. That's really exciting.
Yeah, I teach a lot of cooking classes at libraries, and I do the smoothies classes a lot. But the Girl Scout cookie one is one that I've only taught a couple of times.
So we are in an elite crew here. Very cool. Which was your son's favorite Girl Scout cookie recipe? Was there one that stood out?
I think probably either the lemon cookie one or the peanut butter. Yeah. My favorite is always the chocolate mint, the thin mint.
The thin mint, yep. I think that'd be mine too. That is always awesome.
Yeah.
I know people really love the in my family the Thanks a Lot, which actually has never really been my favorite. I think it's just a sugar cookie basically. But what's the? I'm trying to remember all the. I had one of those chocolate peanut butter ones the other day, and I had to stop. Well, I had to stop because the box was empty, honestly. But,
yeah.
What's the Samoan? Was that the one with the coconut? Did you create that one?
I did. Yeah.
What is the Samoan again? Remind us.
It's coconut and chocolate, and it's not toffee. It's caramel in it.
Oh, that sounds really good.
Yeah. So yeah. You can recreate it.
All right. Very exciting. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. Who doesn't love a smoothie? Who doesn't love a Girl Scout cookie? It's like the perfect combination.
That's right. And Girl Scout cookies only come out once a year. So if you make the smoothies, and you can have the flavors all year round.
That's right. And I was thinking, you could put Girl Scout cookies inside of ice cream, but who needs to put them in ice cream when you can put it in a smoothie? I mean, it's like everything that you like about ice cream, but drinkable. It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, when I had the idea to do it, then I was looking around online and said, oh, somebody must have thought of this already. Somebody must have come up with it. And, all the recipes that I could find were take milk and Girl Scout cookies and put it in a blender, and there's a smoothie. I said, no, that's not how it works.
That's right. Let's go back to the fundamentals, people. This is coconut. This is chocolate. This is sugar.
Right.
That's right. Now, like with the caramel, with the Samoan, I know that you don't like to use refined sugars even. You like to do these as healthy as possible. I'm sure there's a lot of refined sugar in Girl Scout cookies.
There are, yeah.
So you figured out, what have you figured out?
So I use dates for that. In all of the smoothies that I use, I don't use any refined sugar, agave, maple syrup, or any of that. I just use dates, which is a whole food healthy sweetener. So that's definitely in a number of these smoothies. One thing I say with these smoothies is these ones are fancy. So these are not going to be the, put a bunch of things together in 2 minutes and make it. It does require some prep time ahead of time. It's not the easiest thing in the world to, make a bunch of healthy ingredients taste like a Girl Scout cookie. So it does take a little bit of prep time, but it's all well worth it. And they're fancy, and they're, really nice treats to have.
Well, I'm super excited. People can certainly go out and check out our previous classes. They're out here on YouTube. If they can come to our site and just look for the Adult Programs playlist. And I'll share the links with you, Colin, so that you can make sure you saw them all. But they finished all the post-production work, so they look really slick, I think.
Excellent.
And I was just looking at it, and I know that we have the smoothies that taste like desserts out there right now. So people who are enticed by this and just can't wait to learn about how to make the Girl Scout cookies, they can go and find, I wouldn't call them simple, but it sounds like they're going to be simpler recipes than what we're going to get with this one, which is going to be super exciting. I can't wait to step up. I mean, I feel like the previous, we already stepped up, I know, our smoothie game in the house. And this is just going to take us to another level. So it's very cool. Thank you.
Awesome. All right.
Great. Well, I know I would be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to the Friends of the Library for helping make this happen, and also a thanks to the Boston Vegetarian Society for co-sponsoring this with us. We know that they love figuring out how to promote plant-based diets, which is something that we all share. And it's great for so many reasons. It's great for the planet. It's great for us individually, and really just love having the BVS as a sponsor. So appreciate them giving a shout out. And,
that's great.
Appreciate their support. So, Colin, thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to it, and I know we'll be enjoying smoothies together sometime soon. Thank you.
All right, sounds great.
We're excited to partner again with the Quincy Historical Society on Monday evening, August 24th at 7 for a program all about yellow fever, the plague that haunted America from John Adams to Betty Davis.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation here with Ed Fitzgerald and Alexander Elliott. We are talking about a program that the library is happy to be co-hosting with the Quincy Historical Society, which both Ed and Alexander are representing. The program is happening on Monday, August 24th at 7 o'clock, and it's called Yellow Fever, the plague that haunted America from John Adams to Betty Davis. Ed, Alexander, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to do another program together.
We're glad to be doing one with you.
Absolutely. We had such a great turnout when we talked about the 1918 pandemic. And I know it got us, we were in conversations and you had already been thinking about some other pandemics that America has lived through. And the yellow fever, does it qualify as a pandemic? I know we're talking about it as a plague. It was a really, really serious event that was an infectious disease that hurt a lot of people.
It's more a series of epidemics and also some endemic situations where it just existed in some cities year in and year out, like some of the diseases that we experience every summer still do.
Yeah. During a period in the late 1700s, you actually have 7 years in a row when it just keeps coming back and recurring every single year.
Yeah.
Wow. And it was mosquito-borne? Do we know how it was? It was mosquito-borne.
Yeah. Which took them a long time to figure out. I mean, go ahead.
So we do know that it is a mosquito-borne illness. It is still in existence, mostly, though, centralized around tropical climates. But it's essentially a mosquito would bite someone who had the disease and then pass it on to somebody else, and then it would essentially spread from there.
And what are the symptoms for yellow fever? It's not something I have any personal, I don't know what it's like. Thankfully, knock on wood.
Yeah, fortunately, neither do I. But typical symptoms are upset stomach, and where it gets its name from is it causes jaundice, especially in very severe cases. And so the symptoms last for and you have a fever, of course, and a few other miscellaneous symptoms, but typically the qualifying symptom is that jaundice, and that usually lasts for about 5 or 6 days and usually goes away. But in really severe cases after that, it will come back, and that's when it becomes very dangerous. And that's typically where, if it comes back after those 5 days, that's typically a very bad sign.
Yeah. And it was the fatality rate was quite serious.
It is. If it comes back, it's about from what I read on the CDC website, the WHO website, it's about a 50% mortality rate if it comes back, if it's untreated.
Yeah.
Right.
Fortunately, we do have treatments now. It is a viral disease, so like antibiotics and that sort of thing don't work, but we do have vaccines for it today, which Ed will get into a little bit more. We do have some other treatments for it that are quite effective.
But those are all relatively recent, I assume, for a long time.
Right. No, it was, historically, it was a terror because they did not have any effective treatment for it of any kind. They didn't know where it was coming from. And you could, when it got to epidemic conditions, you could survive, but you had very high mortality rates in the cities that it would strike when it was really bad, which it was recurrently from really the beginning of the 18th century straight through to the last epidemic in America was 1905 in New Orleans. So not totally.
So from the 1700s, until 19. That's over 200 years.
100
Really.
years, yeah. Yeah.
That's generations and generations of people. That's rather astounding.
Yeah.
Which is why we're billing this program as the plague of, the American plague from John Adams to Betty Davis. Now, most people here in Quincy should be familiar with John Adams. Folks may not be as familiar with Betty Davis. They should be. Why don't you tell us a
People
little
my
bit
age are
about-
familiar with Betty Davis. For the benefit of you younger folks, Betty Davis was the great screen actress of really the first half to 2/3 of the 20th century. A lot of people probably remember her from her later things where she was playing in a lot of kind of horror movies and mad killer movies and things like that. But she was a great star of the 30s and 40s and also really a quite beautiful woman and arguably probably the best screen actress in history at her peak. So we'll explain how she and John Adams wind up together in Yellow Fever.
It's the same story.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing about it is not only that it lasted, but it got, and I think that's the other thing we're going to try and look at in the program, is it got into people's subconscious. I mean, it haunted people. So we're going to be looking not only at the history of it, but we're going to be looking at some of the sort of cultural and artistic ways that yellow fever has been informing the American discourse, the American art.
It was pretty widespread. I mean, it came up as far north as, how far north did it come? Because being a mosquito-borne illness, climate change, the world was not as hot, through 1905 as it is today. I can imagine if we didn't have treatment for this today, it could be even scarier as we're closing down communities for Triple E last summer and, seeing it's a real threat. But it did affect a lot of America, especially the southern part of the country.
So in answer to how far north it got, where it's a little bit ironic to think that actually one of the first, or I think the first that we know of, outbreak of yellow fever in North America was actually in 1693 in Boston. So
big muddy, huh?
Yeah. It's a funny disease in that it originates and typically propagates in tropical climates, but it just has enough staying power, and it is just a long enough incubation period, and it's contagious enough through the mosquito bites. That it can spread. If somebody travels from the Caribbean, for example, and goes somewhere else, they are going to take it with them, potentially. In fact, that is one of the most famous pandemics in American history is the one in 1793 in Philadelphia, which is part of the John Adams portion of this story. It actually came from people who were fleeing from an outbreak in the Caribbean, went to Philadelphia to get away from it, and ended up bringing it with them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah. And were they bringing it, is the thought that they either brought it with them like in their blood basically and mosquitoes then already present, or
Exactly. Yeah,
so
that is.
I think so, yeah.
Standing water with mosquito larvae. Yeah.
Well, it could be either, honestly, because that was one of the main things, and one of the ways in which people started to combat yellow fever at that period was by essentially, all of those advisories against, tipping standing water and everything that we have today. This is exactly where that comes from, or part of where that comes from, is because they realize that obviously it's standing water where these mosquitoes are hatching their eggs. And so to cut down on that population, having above ground water cisterns, that was a huge breeding ground for them. And so that was part of the ways to cut down. But yeah, it was primarily the way that it got from the Caribbean to and other tropical climates to more temperate climates was in people who were already infected and who boarded ships without realizing that they were sick.
Yeah.
And potentially the mosquitoes are either on the ships, but obviously less so, but usually as soon as they step off onto the dock, then they start getting bitten by mosquitoes and then it spreads to the population, typically.
Wow. I'm just so fascinated. This sounds like the history of America, and then it seems so wrapped up with the history of the yellow fever. I think it's fascinating that they decided to build Washington, D.C., and I forget the exact timing when it was, I forget his name right now, when D.C. was set up. But I mean, it was put over a swamp. There had to be a lot of mosquitoes in D.C. at the time.
Still are.
And there still are if it's not being sprayed. Was yellow fever wrapped up in the history of that? Did you discover any of that? I don't know.
I haven't seen too much about it in Washington, although it's almost impossible to think that it wasn't. I mean, certainly the yellow fever in Philadelphia, when it was the capital of that series of years that Alexander was referencing, which were also the years of John Adams' vice presidency and presidency in Philadelphia, which is one of the connections, obviously. But New Orleans also. I mean, New Orleans, which was vital to American expansion, and it was really why Louisiana Purchase took place, was because we wanted to secure New Orleans, and we're just trying to go over and make a deal to buy New Orleans, and wound up getting the entire Louisiana territory. And it was endemic in New Orleans, which we're going to talk about in a number of places in the talk. The 1853 epidemic there, 8,000 people died in the summer in a city that, at the time was probably, if it was 100,000 people, was
wow.
And
so, I know that you were saying before when we were speaking earlier that that similar to the impact of COVID, that the yellow fever did not, I mean, it could, obviously mosquitoes can bite anyone and infect anyone, but there seems to be a disparate impact on poorer communities, there are people that were greater exposed and at greater risk. And that's something you saw in your research too, which I expect. I mean, that's something when we look at the history of New Orleans, especially, you look at the Ninth Ward, we look at these areas that have been hit time and time again.
Right.
That was the case, with yellow fever?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they believe that the ultimate origin of the fever, they believe, is in Africa, and that it was a primate to human transmission at some point. But that also indicates that it got to the New World, or to the Western Hemisphere, because of slavery. So it becomes literally a curse, but it also becomes kind of almost symbolically a manifestation of the initial curse of slavery. And it could affect immigrant populations. It could affect, obviously, the poor populations. But it was, because it was a mosquito, it was a pretty equal opportunity
infection.
Yeah.
But I assume, I mean, the less resources you have. I mean, I don't know when screens were introduced, but I imagine that it was easier to get shelter and to have fans or to have things moving the bugs away. The more resources you had. If you're living on the swamp without fans or anything, you're just going to get chewed more. That's
exactly. Yeah. Right.
Well, this is fascinating. So people can expect you're going to have a bunch of you're going to have a PowerPoint presentation or something, again, with some graphics and such to show with folks. And I don't know if you want to tell people now, or we can just tell people that there's going to be a multimedia component. There's going to be some movie included in this as well.
I'll say something that maybe Alexander can fill in a bit more from that. But we're kind of watching the history of the actual disease, and we haven't even touched on one of the sequences in the history of the disease in America, which is the final discovery that it is mosquito-borne, and therefore the beginning to control it, which is tied up with the Spanish-American War and Dr. Walter Reed. So we're going to look at that progression, but we're going to sort of try to parallel it the way in which it turned up in American literary and dramatic and other kinds of representation. So that begins right in the Adams presidency with a novel called Arthur Mervyn, which takes place in the 1793 epidemic that Alexander was referring to. We're going to look at a New Orleans novel called The Grand Decime that was done in 1880 in the wake of a very bad 1878 epidemic that looks at the period right around the Louisiana Purchase and really makes the connection to slavery. But then it also got to Hollywood. At least into the 1930s, there were movies about what Yellow Jack, the actual conquest of the disease by the American Army Medical Corps, when the discovery of the mosquito connection, and also a classic 1938 movie called Jezebel, starring Betty Davis, which takes place again in New Orleans, this time in relation to the 1853 epidemic, which is in many ways, kind of your typical Southern hearts aflutter melodrama on one level, but also really, really interesting, and really, really interesting on the time it's looking at and the time it was made as well. So we're gonna get you some multimedia going here. Anyway.
All right. Well, it sounds like a packed evening, and a lot of history, but tied in with culture, intrigue, mystery. There's a lot to cover here, and sordid American past.
The only thing about Jezebel that I would potentially add is that the way that you've described it to me, which I personally find the most compelling, is that it's sort of that blend of Southern melodrama, but also it has this sort of pervasive air of Southern Gothic to it as well. There's a lot of it's a romance, but it's also got some suspense in there, and so it's a really interesting blend of a movie. It'll be interesting to talk about. Yeah,
and the Gothic does. I mean, one of the things that maybe we may not have hit on it quite as much is that if you did get the disease bad, the physical effects on you were really quite horrifying. So it does kind of verge over into a lot of the representations into a kind of horror Gothic effect. So there's a lot to be done.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. So, great. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to it. Thank you so much for shedding some light, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of lessons that we can learn from this history that we as we think forward to how we're going to live through where we are today. So this should be engaging in so many different levels and provocative for how can we change things so that we can deal with the next pandemic or survive the current one we're in. So thank you so much for talking with me today. I look forward to having this program together.
Thanks for hosting this.
So I hope you've enjoyed my conversation with Ed Fitzgerald and Alexandra Elliott. We have been talking about the program happening on Monday, August 24th at 7:00 p.m. It'll be happening on Zoom, on YouTube, and on Facebook. It is co-presented with the Quincy Historical Society, and it's called Yellow Fever, the Plague That Haunted America, from John Adams to Betty Davis. I hope you will join us for the program.
In addition to all these programs for adults this month, we have lots going on for teens and younger people too. Our summer reading programs end on Friday, August 28th. Children ages 0 to 12 and teens in grades 7 through 12 can register for these all-virtual programs on Beanstack and catch up on logging, reading, activities, and program attendance so they can compete for prizes. Just go to our website to find the links and get started if you haven't already. No pressure, there is still time. You just want to get started, try it now. This month, the library will host fractured fairy tale story times, online yoga, children's talent show, the big finale Zoom dance party for younger kids, and a ton more. Teens will enjoy online Harry Potter D&D, games, karaoke, and more. It's going to be a great time. That's it for this episode of At Your Library. Hopefully, you've enjoyed learning more about some of what's happening at your library this month. If you'd like to learn even more, I strongly encourage you to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, where you can also find some staff picks for some of our favorite things we're reading, watching, and listening to. You can find more staff picks on our YouTube channel, too. The best way to stay up to date on the latest library news is to visit thomascranelibrary.org. Sign up for our monthly email newsletter, like our Facebook pages, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Clayton Cheever. Thanks for joining me for a look at what's happening at your library this month. I hope you enjoyed the conversations I've shared and learning more about what's going on. We're working hard to bring you what you need in these challenging times, and I hope you will join us online to appreciate all of our efforts. Please continue to stay safe and healthy. I look forward to seeing you again in September.